Disgraced Lieutenant General Michael Flynn testifies today before the grand jury down in Georgia looking into Donald Trump's efforts to overturn the 2020 presidential election. The investigation is led by Fani Willis. She's the Fulton County District Attorney. Willis says she is planning to ask General Flynn about his recommendations that he made back in December of 2020, where he told Trump to declare martial law, seize the ballots, and rerun the elections in the states where he lost. General Flynn currently travels around America converting Republicans into disciples of both QAnon and Jesus. He was found guilty of lying to the FBI, and Trump pardoned him. A jury begins deliberating on the fate of Stewart Rhodes. He's the founder of the Oath Keepers. He is charged with seditious conspiracy in the events leading up to the January 6th insurrection. Stewart Rhodes is a Yale Law School graduate, and he is accused by federal prosecutors of conspiring to prevent a peaceful transfer of presidential power. During the trial, Rhodes has been heard on tape planning to hang Nancy Pelosi. Rhodes allegedly stored a cache of military-grade weapons in a hotel room near the Capitol on January 6 while waiting for President Donald Trump to invoke the Insurrection Act that day. Rhodes was expecting to be deputized by the Trump administration to restore order in the Capitol. That's what his defense attorneys claim. The jury will spend all today deliberating. If they don't reach a decision today, they are scheduled to reconvene after Thanksgiving. Twitter. Well, I just heard from Captain Musk, and he has assured passengers that the USS Tweet is unsinkable. Maybe another week? I don't know. Howie Klein says it's kind of like a utility. It almost can't go out of business. We'll see. Elon Musk over the weekend polled users, and they voted for Donald Trump's return to Twitter. The Russian bots have spoken. So now that the Twitterverse has spoken on Donald Trump, any chance we can take a poll on whether or not to get rid of Elon Musk? Something to consider. Trump says he will not return to Twitter. So here's a suggestion. Maybe Elon should buy Truth Social. That's Donald Trump's social media platform, Truth Social. Elon should buy Truth Social and merge it into Twitter. Call it Truther. Call it Truther because truthers are pretty much going to be the only ones left on either one of those two platforms. Get used to these three names: Jim Jordan, James Comer, and Hunter Biden. Say it with me. Jim Jordan, James Comer, and Hunter Biden. Jim Jordan will be the new chairman of the House Judiciary Committee. James Comer is the new chairman of the House Oversight Committee. And Hunter Biden is going to be spending a lot of time up there on Capitol Hill talking about his laptop. That is the Republican agenda. That is the only thing the Republicans are planning for the next 2 years. So what I think Joe Biden should do is pardon his son, Hunter. If Joe Biden really wants to shut down the GOP's entire agenda for the next 2 years, he should issue a blanket pardon for his son, Hunter, immediately. The GOP would have nothing to do for the next 2 years. Zero. And would you blame Joe Biden for pardoning his son? It's his son. The kid is an addict. Yes, he messed up. Did he do some screwy things? Yes. Was it illegal? Probably. Can you prove it in court? After 6 years of Donald Trump, I don't think you can prove anything in court. Pardon your son, Joe. Did Hunter do a little influence peddling? Yeah. And did money go to the big guy, Joe Biden? Probably, maybe, who knows? Hunter Biden, and I'm not trying to be cruel here, is a crackhead. He's a crack addict. Do you really think any court would trust what they find inside the laptop of a crackhead? If you've seen the pictures of Hunter when he's gone on these binges, he was so far gone with hookers and drugs. He was filming porn. You know, instead of investigating Hunter, Republicans should be running him to replace Madison Cawthorn. I feel bad for Hunter Biden, and the more I read about him, the sadder I get for him. As some of you know, I got a taste earlier this year of what it's like to be a political pawn when I was arrested this summer in Washington, D.C. These people don't care whose lives they destroy or what kind of legal fees people have to rack up. The sad thing about Hunter Biden is none of this would be happening to him right now if his father never ran for president. It actually calls Joe Biden's judgment into question. Knowing that your son was this troubled, knowing that he, on crack, was saying things and blaming you for things, may not have been the best idea to run for president. Over the weekend, Hunter's daughter got married at the White House. The president delivered a toast that made everyone weep uncontrollably because he kept calling the bride Tiffany Trump. Try to explain, Tiffany's wedding was in Mar-a-Lago a week earlier. Yesterday, Hunter was back at the White House with his kids watching his dad, Joe, pardon the turkeys for Thanksgiving. I was watching it, and while I was watching it, I thought the turkey he should be pardoning is that idiot kid of his. Pardon Hunter. Is this how anyone wants to spend the next 2 years investigating Hunter Biden? We know that articles of impeachment will be introduced to get even for the 2 impeachments of Trump. Meanwhile, here in America, homelessness will get worse, the number of evictions will escalate, and the minimum wage won't get raised while the planet continues to heat up. Pardon your son. Spare us the travails. And this is different from Trump's kids. Trump's children have 0 redeeming qualities. But unless Joe pardons his son, this is pretty much what you get when Republicans are in power. They have no agenda. They don't have a plan to fight inflation or to save the economy. All they have is a plan to punish people. They use their power to punish, to impeach, because it slows government down to a crawl, which is what the people in charge of the Republican Party, the richest 1%, that's what they want. They just want distractions. They don't want to help anybody. So punish Hunter Biden for 2 years, and the rich will get richer. Geraldo Rivera over the weekend said Joe Biden should pardon Donald Trump for the good of the nation. He said Biden should do it for the same reason Gerald Ford pardoned Nixon, for the good of the nation. Yeah, Biden should pardon Trump for the good of the nation. It sounds like something that would make perfect sense to a third grader, which is exactly why Geraldo Rivera works for Fox News. How was pardoning Nixon good for the country? It was good for Nixon. It was good for all the people he would have taken down with him if the Watergate prosecutor went after him and prosecuted. Pardoning Nixon wasn't good for the country. However, in Nixon's defense, he was disgraced. He had the decency to resign. Granted, he was going to be impeached, but there was no guarantee he was going to get removed from office. But Nixon, as indecent as he was, he did quit for the good of the country. He didn't want to drag us through 2 more years of Watergate. That was back when our government and presidents had things to do besides being impeached and going on trial. They were passing legislation, the Clean Water Act, the EPA. Nixon was doing that, and he was combating inflation by instituting price freezes. That was back then when Washington got things done. pardoning Nixon was bad for the country. It told future presidents they're above the law. Now, the Kennedy assassination, today is November 22nd, which means the Kennedy assassination was 59 years ago today. And it is no coincidence Gerald Ford sat on the Warren Commission. Gerald Ford, who pardoned Nixon, also sat on the Warren Commission. The Warren Commission investigated the Kennedy assassination and pretty much issued a blanket pardon to the CIA, the FBI, the mafia, Cuba, Russia, and everybody. Even, they didn't need to pardon Lee Harvey Oswald. He was dead already. But he pretty much did it according to the Warren Commission. Everybody else got a pardon. And that's exactly why Nixon made Ford his vice president after Agnew had to resign. They knew from the Warren Commission that Gerald Ford would play ball. He knew when to keep a lid on something. So Geraldo Rivera says Biden should pardon Trump. Forget pardoning Trump. Nobody wants to see that. It's not how this movie ends. I see Trump in Mar-a-Lago at the top of his stairs, going over the banister in a fog of gunpowder like Tony Montana at the end of Scarface. A pardon for Trump? That's not how he wants this to end. Plus, if you pardon Trump and his kids, it just empowers them to commit even more crimes. Roger Stone was pardoned by Trump. Steve Bannon was pardoned by Trump. Now they need new pardons. And it's the same thing with Trump. You pardon Trump, he'll need a pardon the next day. These people are addicts. They're addicted to pardons. Over the weekend, I read of this thing called mass shooting, a mass shooting. It was in Colorado Springs. I guess I've been living under a rock. I had no idea what this term mass shooting meant. Have you heard of the term mass shooting? I looked it up. I had no idea what mass shooting meant. Apparently, a mass shooting is when a white male, usually 21 years or younger, it's when a white male buys this thing, and I hope I'm pronouncing it properly. My apologies if I get it wrong. He buys an assault weapon, and they go into a school or a gay nightclub with these assault weapons. I think I'm pronouncing that right, which, and you're not going to believe this, these assault weapons can fire something like 30 rounds in under a minute, and they end up killing lots and lots of people. I mean, these are the type of weapons used by the military. I didn't know this, but apparently it's very easy in America for anyone to buy an assault weapon. Again, it's called a mass shooting. I had to look this up. It's a neologism, new word, I guess. Apparently, this is not the first time something like this has happened here in America. Apparently, there's been another mass shooting. So I would like all my listeners to look into this. Look into the words mass shooting. It's two words, not one. It's called a mass shooting. I'm not trying to be an alarmist here, but we probably should familiarize ourselves with this concept because, I can see something like this eventually getting out of hand. Like every couple of years, something like this might happen again. It seems like we should probably not allow Americans to buy these, and I hope I'm pronouncing it properly, an assault weapon. Seems to me, just to be on the safe side, only soldiers should be allowed to carry assault weapons during wartime. You should look into it. It's called a mass shooting, and they use this thing called assault weapons. Today is the 59th anniversary of the Kennedy assassination. By 1968, Bobby Kennedy, Martin Luther King, and Malcolm X had also been assassinated. And you know what they talked about in 1968? Gun control. Handguns. They talked about outlawing handguns. Can you imagine how quaint a notion that is, getting rid of handguns? Since 1968, more than 1 million Americans have died from guns. And the idea of gun control, forget it. That's not even up for discussion anymore. The guns have gotten more powerful, more deadly. And these imbeciles, these gun crackpots, talk about their Second Amendment rights, their liberties. Nobody talked about this in the 60s or the 70s or the 80s or the 90s. Around the late 90s, they started talking about their liberties when it came to gun rights. The Second Amendment doesn't guarantee the right to bear arms. Antonin Scalia guarantees the right to bear arms. He wrote the Heller decision, which pretty much opened the floodgates for everybody to buy a gun. It was decided back in June of 2008, and the majority opinion was written by Antonin Scalia, who ironically died on a hunting trip. The Heller decision made gun ownership suddenly a liberty, like freedom of speech. The Heller decision, written by Scalia, specifically said the Second Amendment guaranteed every American the right to own a gun. And where did Antonin Scalia get this from? His ass. He just pulled it out of his ass. It all comes down to how Antonin Scalia decided to read the Second Amendment. I'm going to read you the Second Amendment. It's never been clear. The Heller decision is this new front for the Second Amendment that claims the Second Amendment was written very clearly. It never was. This is what the Second Amendment says. A well-regulated militia, comma, being necessary to the security of a free state, comma, the right of the people to keep and bear arms, comma, shall not be infringed. That is not a complete sentence. It's missing a noun and a transitive verb. A well-regulated militia, comma, being necessary to the security of a free state, comma, the right of the people to keep and bear arms, comma, shall not be infringed. It's an incomplete sentence. It's bad grammatically. That's why for decades, if not centuries, nobody looked at the Second Amendment and believed it guaranteed everyone the right to carry guns. Some people, like me, interpret the Second Amendment to mean only members of a militia can carry weapons. See, back when that was written, we didn't have a full standing army. I don't think they anticipated a full standing army back then. And when they needed people to fight the Native Americans or put down a disturbance, they formed militias to go off and handle these disturbances. And that's why they wanted Americans to have muskets. So go read the Second Amendment. Lots of commas, lots of clauses in the Second Amendment. Now go read the Heller decision. This is used by all the gun nuts. This is our liberty. The right to carry an Uzi to the grocery store is enshrined in our Constitution. It is not. It is not. But the Heller decision leads these idiots to believe it is. Read the Heller decision. Scalia spends pages dissecting the sentences to prove the original intent, right? He dissects the sentences to prove that the original intent of our founding fathers was everybody should own a gun. That's Scalia's reading of the Second Amendment. Now, here is what he wrote, okay? This is the Heller decision. You think the Second Amendment is opaque? This is what Scalia wrote to interpret an equally opaque amendment. He offers up some writing in the Heller decision that is just as indecipherable. Quote, the amendment's prefatory clause announces a purpose but does not limit or expand the scope of the second part, the operative clause. The operative clause's text and history demonstrate that it connotes an individual right to keep and bear arms. The prefatory clause comports with the court's interpretation of the operative clause. It goes on for pages like that. From Scalia's interpretation of prefatory clauses and operative clauses in the Second Amendment, suddenly we all have the right to keep an AR-15. Unbelievable. Unbelievable. Obviously, when it comes to our guns, the Founding Fathers had no idea what they wanted since they were way too busy smoking the hemp our Constitution was written on. Scalia can't write a clear sentence, and neither could our Founding Fathers, so everybody has to die. That is our current Supreme Court. They want us to own guns. Clarence Thomas wants the people in New York City to be able to carry guns, and he actually believes, he wrote back in June, that the Constitution protects that Colorado shooter's right to buy an assault weapon, but it doesn't protect the right of the people he murdered to get married. These are some really diseased minds, and they're playing with our lives. People got killed, as you know, over the weekend. A gunman shot 5 people to death and injured 18 inside an LGBTQ nightclub Saturday in Colorado Springs, Colorado. One of the performances at that club that night featured drag queens. They had a drag show. Drag shows, drag queens. You know, in the lead up to these midterms, Republicans not only railed against, but promised to outlaw drag shows and drag queens. I'm not making this up. Republicans are trying to outlaw drag queens. Again, assault weapons, perfectly fine. You can buy an assault weapon at a gun show. It's perfectly legal. Not at a drag gun show. You know, if there are men in wigs trying to sell you an assault weapon, shut it down. This is where we're at with the GOP. Drag queens, drag shows. They're outlawing men dressing like women. Monty Python, Mrs. Doubtfire, Medea, Some Like It Hot, J. Edgar Hoover on a Saturday night. I'm not making this up. They want it to be a criminal act when a man dresses up like a woman because they're afraid children might see them. Like we have nothing else to worry about. The day after the midterms, Republicans in Tennessee introduce SB 3, a law that would make it a crime to perform a drag show in public where children might see it. In Texas, Attorney General Ken Paxton, Republican, repeatedly said this year, any drag queen whose show is witnessed by a child should be arrested. In Texas, 2 bills have been introduced in the state legislature that would pretty much make it a crime for a transgender woman or a drag queen to sing the national anthem at a baseball game. So, that shooting in Colorado Springs is weather. It's a weather event that comes from the anti-LGBTQ climate Republicans have created. The alleged shooter taken into custody is Anderson Lee Aldridge. His mother is the daughter of California Assembly member Randy Voelpel, who recently lost re-election. Assembly member Voelpel identifies as a MAGA Republican who, 3 days after January 6, wrote an opinion piece in the San Diego Union Tribune in which, referring to the storming of the Capitol, he wrote, quote, "This is Lexington and Concord. First shots fired against tyranny." The shooter's grandfather went on to write, Tyranny will follow in the aftermath of the Biden swear-in on January 20th. See, it's all connected. Is it any surprise that the grandson of one of these MAGA lunatics would allegedly do something like this? The Republican Party spent all of 2022 demonizing drag shows, drag queens, while fetishizing assault weapons. What happened in Colorado Springs over the weekend was inevitable. Do you remember Ronnie Jackson, Congressman Ronnie Jackson? I talk about him. He's a doctor. He was Donald Trump's personal physician in the White House, and Trump loved him because Ronnie would lie about Donald Trump's health. He would add a couple of inches to his height so Donald wouldn't look like he's obese on paper. Trump loved him and named him to head the Veterans Administration. But when that happens, they investigate you, and they found some things out about Ronnie Jackson that weren't so nice. Abusive towards women. He drank too much, handed out uppers and downers to everybody in the White House, and he was forced to resign. And when you're forced to resign, what do? You go back to Texas and run for Congress as a Republican. He ran for re-election this year railing against the drag queens. This is one of his many tweets. I've read them throughout the year. This was his latest. I just learned there will be a drag show coming to Amarillo, Texas, where young children will be allowed and encouraged to attend. This is sick. Children should not be allowed to attend events like this. This needs to be shut down immediately. Here is Dr. Ronnie Jackson earlier this year with, count them, two assault weapons and a message for Joe Biden.
Hey everybody, this is Congressman Ronnie Jackson from the great state of Texas. I have a message for the Biden administration. If you're thinking about taking our ARs, you can start here in Texas. On behalf of all the law-abiding gun owners in the state of Texas, I just want to say, come and get it.
That is a doctor, a United States congressman, homophobic, anti-drag show, anti-drag queen, brandishing AR-15s. It was only a matter of time before this happened in Colorado Springs, because words like elections have consequences. When you demonize drag queens, when you demonize transgender women, when you demonize the LGBTQ, you encourage crazed men to get an assault weapon and act on your words. No thoughts and prayers. Pass the Respect for Marriage Act today, now. Pass the Respect for Marriage Act now. Today, as I mentioned, is the 59th anniversary of the Kennedy assassination. LBJ, Lyndon Johnson, was his vice president. He became president after Kennedy was assassinated. And he used that tragedy to pass the Civil Rights Acts of 64 and 65. Democrats should use the tragedy over the weekend in Colorado Springs to codify same-sex marriage into law. Pass the Respect for Marriage Act today. Today. Timothy Michael Dolan is New York City's Archbishop, and in the Catholic Church. I have no reason to believe he is a sexually voracious homosexual like his predecessor, Cardinal Francis Joseph Spellman. That's Cardinal Spellman, good friend of J. Edgar Hoover. Anyway, Cardinal Dolan, and I have no reason to believe he's a sexually voracious homosexual like his predecessor, Cardinal Francis Joseph Spellman, who was a sexually voracious homosexual. Anyway, Cardinal Dolan was appointed by Pope Benedict XVI back in 2009. Pope Benedict used to be Cardinal Joseph Ratzinger. From 1971 until he was named Pope, Cardinal Ratzinger was the head man in the Catholic Church when it came to handling accusations of sexual abuse. Pope Benedict, still alive, as far back as 1971, was shuffling pedophiles from one parish to the next. In April of 2010, United Nations Judge Jeffrey Robinson, he's the former president of the United Nations War Crimes Court, he called for Pope Benedict to be prosecuted before the International Criminal Court for, quote, crimes against humanity for actively covering up the abuse of children. Now, I like the Catholic Church. I do. I think they are committed to peace. This new pope speaks out constantly against war, climate change, capitalism, greed, and you get a sense that he wants to let priests marry. You also get a sense that he would ordain same-sex marriages, but the institution won't let him. I am a believer in the Catholic Church. I think there's no other organized religion in the world more committed to helping the poor. But Cardinal Timothy Dolan here in New York last week came out against the Respect for Marriage Act. He doesn't want same-sex marriage in America. He doesn't want it passed. In a letter, Archbishop Dolan said, and I quote, "Wedding cake bakers, faith-based adoption and foster care providers, religious employers seeking to maintain their faith identity, faith-based housing agencies are all at greater risk of discrimination under this legislation," unquote. He's saying that if you legalize same-sex marriage, codify it into law, then people who run faith-based organizations run the risk of being accused of discrimination. Yes, that would be discrimination, Cardinal. With all due respect, Cardinal Dolan, same-sex couples getting married isn't your biggest problem. Your biggest problem is unmarried men, especially unmarried men who work for you, molesting altar boys. I'd get your house in order before I'd start worrying about same-sex marriage. A Catholic cardinal passing moral judgment on same-sex marriage is like an Israeli settler in the West Bank passing judgment on how the United States treats Native Americans. Regarding homosexuality and same-sex weddings, Cardinal Dolan, you lost your moral authority decades ago. Stay out of this. Welcome to the Mop-Up for November 22nd, 2022. I'm David Feldman, coming to you from an air shaft overlooking a parking garage somewhere in Manhattan where the temperature is 49 degrees and sunny. President Kennedy was assassinated 59 years ago. At the end of this, I'm going to link to my interview with comedian Mort Saul, who dedicated a good portion of his life, career, and reputation helping New Orleans District Attorney Jim Garrison try to prosecute those who killed Kennedy. So stay with me. The link should work at the very end of this. So what do I believe about the Kennedy assassination? I believe conspiracy theories mushroom in the dark. That's what I believe. Lee Harvey Oswald was never given a trial. He was shot to death mysteriously during that prison transfer. Now, I have my own theories on what happened in Dallas 59 years ago. I'm not quite sure what happened on November 22nd, 1963. But I know what happened after November 22nd. Everyone from the FBI to Bobby Kennedy, President Johnson, the CIA, and the Secret Service conspired to withhold information from the American people and each other. When the government conspires, not necessarily to kill a president, but to keep the events surrounding that killing secret, then Americans will do their own research and draw their own conclusions. Like I said, where there is darkness, conspiracy theories mushroom. Up until recently, conspiracy theories never rose to the level of deference they now have. These days, entire news organizations are built on conjecture instead of gathering facts. When Paul Pelosi was attacked, all you heard on Fox News was what might have happened, conjecture, because the imagination is way more entertaining than the truth. A lover's spat between Paul Pelosi and his attacker is way more interesting than a crazed right-winger wandering in off the street. The current Republican Party is fueled by insane conspiracy theories rooted in nothing other than someone's fevered imagination. Transgender women are conspiring to convert your son to become a woman. Black Lives Matter is conspiring to turn our public schools into brainwashing camps where white people are programmed to hate who they are. George Soros is funding caravans of undocumented migrants from Central America to sneak into this country and vote for Democrats. Democrats are conspiring to steal elections in Arizona. Big Pharma and Dr. Fauci are conspiring with Bill Gates to place chips inside COVID vaccines so the government can keep tabs on you. The entire Democratic leadership is run by pedophiles who are grooming young boys and then delivering those young boys as sacrificial lambs before the world bankers for their ritual sacrifice. This is not a joke. I'm not making this up. When you poll Republicans, they believe one or more of what I just said. Now, I used to think Republicans pretended to believe these things, to own us. But they do believe those things. Why? Because newspapers are dying, and Republicans lack critical thinking and internet literacy. They believe the first thing they're told, especially if they want to believe it. Republicans will say they prefer to do their own homework, but they don't know what homework means. What they're leaving out of the homework equation is that that includes schooling. There's school where you do your schoolwork, and then you come home and do your homework. In other words, homework is checked by a teacher. Teacher has been taken out of the equation. Going on the internet to study the efficacy of ivermectin isn't homework. It's a suicide mission. You need someone to check your homework. I'm doing my own homework. Well, unless your homework is checked by a teacher, you're killing yourself and us. Now, by the time Kennedy was assassinated, we had the John Birch Society. There were the fringe elements of the Conservative Party who believed putting fluoride in the water was part of a government mind control experiment. They also believed communists were trying to take over America, corrupt our youth, and destroy our way of life. It was never elevated to the level it is now. Maybe the communist stuff was. I think both parties were consumed by that conspiracy theory that led to tens of millions dead in Indochina. But right now, we have a party, the Republican Party, that doesn't read, it doesn't think, and it believes what it's told to believe. Why? Well, I think it goes back to the Kennedy assassination. Some lessons might have been learned. Kennedy was shot in broad daylight, was all out in the open for everyone to see. It had the illusion of transparency. And then we saw Lee Harvey Oswald get shot. We saw the president get shot, and we saw Lee Harvey Oswald get shot. We read about all the witnesses dying mysteriously. It was all happening out in the open, just like the internet, just like the Trump administration. All the facts were there, but somehow we just couldn't put them together. There was no cohesion. I think the Kennedy assassination taught some of the people in charge, give the American people so much information they won't be able to decipher truth from fact. It works. Nobody can agree on how exactly Jack Kennedy died. All the evidence is there. Too much evidence. Flood the end zone with evidence. Nobody knows where the ball is. And that's what's happening right now in America. Nobody can agree on anything anymore because there's so much evidence. How do you arrive at a truth? Ultimately, I believe good democratic government can arrive at a truth. Good government means courts, trials, congressional hearings, press conferences where both sides attempt to make their best case. And that's, I think, the only way we can ever get to a truth. The files on the Kennedy assassination have not all been released. We will all be dead when all the evidence is in on the Kennedy assassination. And by then, any attempt at a final judgment will be clouded by time. Before there is a truth, before you know what is right or wrong about something, you need to know right from wrong. And America, unfortunately, is moving further and further away from knowing right from wrong. Even Nixon knew right from wrong. He knew to resign, not Trump. Let's start with right and wrong. A 3-year-old knows right from wrong. And then they get to be adults here in America and they forget right from wrong. Forget what the truth is. Focus on right and wrong. You will get down to the truth eventually. Once you focus solely on right and wrong, morality, the truth will emerge. If you enjoyed today's show, please like it, subscribe to this channel, and share it with your friends via social media. If you stick around, I may be able to do this probably. There will be a link to my interview with the great Mort Sahl discussing the Kennedy assassination that should be coming up next. If it doesn't come up in your feed, just search Mort Sahl on the David Feldman Show website. I'm David Feldman. Happy Thanksgiving. I'll see you Friday. Remember to stay strong and protect the weak.